Hello and welcome to part 4 in this short series with Creation Worldview Ministries. I'm Pastor Brian Madden, and we're delighted again to have with us Dr. Grady S. McMurtry. And Dr. McMurtry, we have a few more questions for you. We're really enjoying this series, and we do appreciate how fluent you've been with your answers and how in depth you've been with your answers.
Well,
and,
it's a pleasure to be with you.
We are absolutely delighted to have you. So if I may proceed with these questions. Again, there are two, and the first one is, Darwin said that natural selection is what drives the evolutionary process. What is the truth about natural selection? And also, we hear a lot about the survival of the fittest in evolution. Does this concept have any validity at all?
Well, those are the two most common phrases that you hear. Now, let's take a look at natural selection for just a moment. First of all, just the words themselves require a selector. It would require that nature has intelligence to select. But the fact of the matter is, nature doesn't have intelligence in and of itself. Nature cannot select anything. Today we now know from studies in science that nature is simply a level playing field. That what has happened is that God has placed within animals, plants, people, the tools, the abilities to adapt and so forth to different environments, and that if you have the skill set to survive in an area or adapt to it, then you'll survive. If you don't, you won't. But nature's not doing the selecting. It's because of pre-programmed information that God has put in the organisms that can or cannot survive in environments which are neutral. You know, nature doesn't select anything. I find it interesting that Wallace wrote a letter. Now, of course, he was the co-discoverer of Darwinism, really didn't get the credit he really should have. But he's a nice guy, and he let Darwin go ahead and take the limelight. But Wallace stood Darwin straight up and wrote him a letter chastising him and says, "You've used the words natural selection, but it's bogus." I'm not quoting from the letter, but but he wrote him a detailed letter, and Darwin turned back around and wrote to Wallace and said, "You know, you're right." And think with me what was going on when Charles Darwin wrote Origin of the Species and his other works and so forth. What was going on in the UK and in other countries, Europe and so on, was a lot of breeding going on to get purebred horses, cows, dogs, pigeons. And what Darwin witnessed is called artificial selection. Human intelligence was taking the genetic information and guiding and directing the breeding process to get certain results. And so what Darwin witnessed was called artificial selection, where an outside intelligence is guiding the genetic process. And he knew if he called it artificial selection, nobody would believe in evolution. It's obvious. So instead of calling it what he saw, which was artificial selection, he called it natural selection to deceive people.
Very clever.
And Wallace called him on it. But nature doesn't select. Now, when you think about these terminologies, you suddenly realize that they're valueless. When it comes to survival of the fittest, we have another thing entirely. Both creationists and evolutionists in general would suggest that fittest typically survive. But they don't always survive. And I'd like to think of several concepts. First of all, survival of the fittest is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The Greeks called it a tautology which falls on its own weight. What that means is it's patently circular and only proves itself. So, for instance, we ask these questions, you know, why did it survive? And the answer is because it was the fittest. Well, how do you know it was the fittest? Because it survived. And you have this circular reasoning which simply is a self-fulfilling prophecy. What's interesting is that in science today we know it's not true. Today it is often the weakest that survive. There are creatures like possums, or opossums if you prefer, that feign death. And thereby not eaten. They're chased but not eaten. They're not fast enough to get away from a large predator. They'll feign death and the predator will pass them by. There are birds who will either feign death or feign a broken wing or something like that to draw predators away from their nest. And so they're feigning weakness, but it allows them to survive. And survival of the fittest would not explain arrival of the fittest either. It doesn't explain anything in terms of an evolutionary process. But recent wildlife management studies have been done proving that it is not always survival of the fittest. It's sometimes survival of the weakest. We've done recent wildlife management studies published in major magazines where we've done experiments with mountain lions. Okay. Now, I live in Florida. We have mountain lions, although they're sometimes called panthers in Florida, but they're a species of mountain lion. And they live in our swamps, and primarily they hunt deer. And we actually took a totally healthy deer, tethered it in such a way that it could not move, run, left it where we knew panthers would be in the area, photographed. Panther came along, saw this totally healthy animal, easy kill, don't have to exert any energy here, man, this is an easy kill, and walked right past us. Wow. In the southwestern part of the United States, there's a lot of sheep. In the somewhat desert regions, sheep are a good thing for them to grow. And so these sheep farmers, the mountain lions are a big problem because the mountain lions come out of the hills, kill the sheep, it's an easy kill. Don't have to go hunting. And so they wanted to do something about the mountain lions, and they are allowed to kill the lions that have become a problem. They don't go out and hunt them in the mountains, but if they're a problem, they are allowed to do this. So what they wanted to do was this. They wanted to put poison collars around sheep, especially the young ones, the lambs. And then if a mountain lion did take it, it would get poisoned and die. Yeah. And that would eliminate the problem. So the farmers said, okay, well, that's fine. We'll do that. But we don't want to put the poison collars around the big, larger lambs. So what we're going to do is we'll put it around the runts and the ones that aren't so good because they're weak, and the lions will go after them first, and it'll poison them, and we won't lose much because these are runt sheep. Yeah. Anyway. Yes, right. And what happened was the lions went for the big, healthy lambs and bypassed the ones with the poisonous collars. Yeah. So being a runt allowed them to survive. Of course. But what we have discovered through this process of research is that God has put an instinctive mechanism inside predators that says if I cannot, catch it and kill it, if I can't chase and kill, then avoid it as an instinctive thing to protect the life of the predator. Yeah. Because we used to think, and probably to some extent still true, but we used to think that when a lion looked at a herd of antelope in Africa, it took the young and the old because the young and the old weren't fast enough to stay up with the herd. And that's just life. And that they also took the infirm and the genetically defective because actually the concepts of natural selection, survival of the fittest, actually came from a creation-believing scientist in 1835, William Blythe. And he said it was the mechanism that God had put in nature in order to preserve and maintain the purity of the created kind, a biblical concept. Right. Yeah. And certainly there's a logic to it, and to some degree it's correct. But this modern research has allowed us to see that yes, they take the young and the old, and that's just life. And sometimes they may take the sick and the infirm or genetically defective too. Yeah. But that in general they will avoid them. Because God's instinctive thing that's been placed inside them tells them that if they cannot chase it and kill it, it's not healthy. That it would be bad for them to eat it. They might get sick. And so it isn't always survival of the fittest. It is often survival of the weakest. And let's take it one step further. Let's talk about fish swimming in the ocean, schools of fish swimming in the ocean. And if you think about how various predators hunt, let's say seals or killer whales or whatever, you see that they'll find the school of fish. And the fish see the predator, Optics are not great in the water, but they see them. And they want to get away because they don't want to get eaten. And so what happens is the predators find them and they start to swim in a curve ahead of the fish. Now the fish want to stay away from the predator. So the fish also start to curve as they're trying to get away from the predator, right? Because they're being chased in essence. But what's really happening is the predators are hurting them. because the predators continued to go in a curve and the fish continued to go in a curve. Sometimes I've seen these wonderful underwater photography things where you actually see a tornado-like effect of fish in the water. The whole school is just turning in a tight tornado. And then the predators, taking turns, go turning through the school of fish, through the tornado, going like this. Now, ask yourself a question. Is that the survival of the fittest?
Certainly not.
Or is that the survival of the luckiest? And the truth in nature, it's survival of the luckiest. You could be the biggest, smartest, fastest fish in the whole school. If you're in the way of those jaws, you're gone. And so we see that survival of the fittest is a meaningless terminology and has been disproven scientifically. That yes, the strong and the smartest sometimes survive longer. They all die. But that sometimes it's the weakest and sometimes it's just the luckiest.
Wow.
I mean, you know a guy named Bill Gates, right?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Microsoft?
Yes.
Right? Pretty smart guy.
Yep.
Not a Christian, unfortunately, but a pretty smart guy. And so let's think about this. He's got all the money in the world, right? And well, he's got a lot.
He's a lot.
And he's smart and everything else. But you know, he lives in the Seattle area, Washington State. And one day he gets out of his car, he goes into a business someplace, and he's going to go to another one, and he's going to cross the street, and he steps off the curb and gets hit by a bus. Now, is that survival of the fittest? You know? No, he in this particular case, he made a mistake, and it cost him his life. So it isn't always survival of the fittest.
No,
it's often survival of the weakest. Sometimes it's survival of the luckiest. And again, this concept of natural selection. Even Dr. Mivart, who was a fellow of the Royal Society, a great man, had all kinds of honors, wrote a quote that was included by Darwin in his 6th edition and Dr. Mivart said that natural selection was incipient to determining how things came into existence. And what he was saying was creation is true and evolution is not. It wasn't capable of producing what we see today. And Darwin even included that in his chapter on flaws in my theory that was in the 6th edition. And so scientists, even back in his time, knew that natural selection, survival of the fittest, didn't prove a thing.
Wow.
It's just words used to deceive people.
Incredible. Well, that's fascinating, Dr. McMurtry. And we don't have a lot of time, and we really appreciate how well you've answered the questions. Can I just put one last question if we can? Maybe,
sure.
maybe I'm trying to get as much out of you as I possibly can.
Maybe one or even two, who knows?
So let's see how we go. But here's a question. Evolutionists claim that mutations cause the changes necessary to achieve microevolution, the change of one kind of creature into another type of creature. What is the truth about mutations?
Okay. Well, remember that evolutionists believe in the God of random chance. Evolutionists believe in eternal things. They believe in eternal mass, energy, and time. And they believe that only random chance has caused what we see, the complexity of the universe, to come into existence. Now, because they do not believe in an outside designer, creator, God of any kind, they say that everything must happen naturally. They're naturalistic in their thinking. They cannot think about the supernatural whatsoever. And so it's naturalistic, mechanistic, totally random. Now, in that view, they then say that things can become simple to the complex by random chance, and that once rocks or minerals become organized in such a way by random chance as to form a living organism, that then what happens is that they'll get bigger, better, faster, smarter over time, correct?
Yeah.
Now, the mechanism to change hereditary information, which is the genes, the genetics, they say is mutation. That as material becomes a mutation and a mutation and a mutation, that this changes the genetic information from one kind and allows the next kind to evolve into existence. And it all sounds logical, all sounds plausible. That doesn't make it true. And let's define the word mutation scientifically. The word mutation scientifically means copying error. Copying error. Now let's think about that for a second. Now, I have defeated major evolutionists in debates by simply asking a question that's built around this concept. You see, what happens in genetics, and this is so simple, anybody can understand it, a child can understand it. In genetics, what happens? We copy half the information from mama, half the information from papa, and we pass it on into the next generation in a new combination of information. That's baby, okay? Now, when you copy something, you have only two choices. You can either copy it perfectly, and if it's perfect, there's no mutation, there's no change, there's no copying error. We have copied it perfectly. And so it's only a new combination of the previously existing information, but it's no new information. Now, the only other way you can copy something, you can either copy it perfectly or you can copy it imperfectly. Can you copy it more perfectly?
No, no.
You see, genetics, the laws of genetics are conservative, they're not creative. Genetics never produces new beneficial information at a higher level of complexity or intelligence by random chance. The only way you'll ever get an increase in complexity or intelligence is with the input from a greater intelligence. And so the laws of genetics prove that evolution is not true. Now, what happens? We either copy it perfectly, so in that generation there's no change, or we copy it imperfectly. That's a mutation. That's a copying error. A mutation is a change in the previous information. Now, when you change perfect information, it becomes imperfect. And so what has happened is this. We are in a state of continual decay. If I gave you the numbers, it's incredible. You have 50 to 100 trillion cells in the average human body. Inside each cell, we have 1,000 to 1 million mutations per day per cell.
Incredibly.
Today we now know from genetic studies, the human genome and other genetic studies, we now know today that the human genome is losing 1 to 2% of its useful information per generation. The miracle is that we even exist. It would be impossible. And you know, we asked earlier, could people evolve? Well, one of the reasons we know that people did not evolve from apes is simple. Evolutionists say that, you know, apes existed millions of years ago, that they evolved into people recognizable as human beings 500,000, million or so years ago. But think of the number of generations. Now, you are the 200 to perhaps as much as 300th copy since the original Adam and Eve. Now, think about something. When you copy something, there's never anything as good as the original.
That's correct, yes.
Right? So when you copy things, everything gets worse, never better.
Yeah, of course.
Now, we have only been here 200 to 300 generations, period. And we are in terrible shape. And we cannot live here longer, you know, much longer, because eventually our genetic information will become so corrupted, so far from the original information, that we won't be able to reproduce, at which point we become extinct. And I know that that's not true because I've read the book, and then there are going to be people to meet the Lord when He returns, so it has to be soon. But think about it for a second. How long is a generation? Today you're lucky if it's 20 years. I'm sure everybody knows somebody who's a grandmother at the age of 38, 39, 40. So think with me for a second. We're losing information at 1 to 2% per generation. And we're the 200 to 300th copy since the original. We shouldn't even be here if you just do the maths. But think about the concepts of evolution for just a second. Because we're supposed to be recognizable as humans for 500,000 to 1 million years. Now, let's do the math, okay? Or maths, excuse me. In 1 million years, how many generations would there be? Well, at 20 years per generation, you're talking 50,000 generations, or 40 years to a generation, you're talking 25,000 generations. Now, first of all, where's the bodies? Secondly, where are the artifacts? Where's the arrowheads? Where's the jewelry? We don't have it. We only find the bones and the jewelry and the artifacts for at most a few thousand years. And So this idea that we've been evolving for many thousands of generations, hundreds of thousands of generations, is implausible. It is simply, I said earlier, evolution is a religion.
Yeah.
It is. It's a faith position. They believe in it. But it is based, evolution is irrational, unreasonable, illogical, and unscientific. Yeah. Now, I admit openly, creationists believe by faith as well. But we have tons and tons of evidence that we're right. We have an evidence-based faith. We have more than enough evidence to convict. So let's think about this. Evolutionists believe by faith that is irrational and not based in evidence. And we have a faith that is rational and based in evidence. So which one's the superior faith? But genetics, this concept, mutations are copying errors. I mean, if I walked up to you, and I mean no disrespect to any human being, please understand that, okay? But if I walked up to you and said that you were the result of 1 billion beneficial copying errors, would you believe me?
Probably not.
Probably not. And so what happens in genetics? We start with a perfect copy, Adam and Eve. Yeah. And it goes downhill from there. There is no such thing as a beneficial mutation. Now, some people will cite certain things. Now, this is how ridiculous evolution is. They will say, well, the mutation, the copying error that causes some people in Africa to have sickle cell anemia is beneficial. Why? Because people with sickle cell anemia don't get malaria. Okay, I'll grant you that one, okay? So having sickle cell anemia prevents you from getting malaria. That's good, right? But you ask any person who has sickle cell anemia that is going through all that pain, and they'll tell you, I'd rather have malaria, thank you. Yeah. So these are stupid arguments to suggest that that's a beneficial mutation. It's a copying error that made the blood cells less functional, and they get trapped in the capillaries and so forth, and the people who have it don't have a very good life. Wow. So I don't really think it's beneficial. Yes, it keeps them from getting malaria, but believe me, they'd rather not have it. And so think about this for a second. Things simply get worse over time. There's no such thing as a beneficial mutation. We have actually looked at a catalog of 500,000 known mutations in plants, animals, and people. You can make an argument that 186 have some beneficial aspect to them. Now that means that 99.96% of all mutations are either harmful or lethal, and I can tell you most of them are lethal. So think with me, they want us to believe that we are the result of copying errors, and I have defeated major evolutionists in debate simply by asking them, doctor, where did the original information you're copying come from? And no evolutionist has ever been able to come up with an adequate answer except to say, by faith, I believe that mutations have produced it.
That's right, yeah.
But it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And I said that there's no such thing as a truly beneficial mutation. Now, two things about this. Some people will say, oh, well, there has to be. Well, first of all, let us assume for the moment, I will stipulate, there's no such thing as a beneficial mutation. But let us stipulate for a moment that there was. Let's say in one male, a dog, in one generation, that somehow or another some beneficial mutation had occurred in that dog. Now, first of all, you would have to have an equal and opposite combining mutation in a female and the same generation. And they would have to be located on Earth in the same location so they could get together, right? To theoretically pass it on. But the truth of the matter is it would simply be washed back out, averaged back out in the next generation. So that's the first problem. The second problem is what is called a neutral mutation. While it may be neutral in this generation and has no significant effect, it is nonetheless a mutation. Yeah. It is a copying error where the information hasn't been lost, but it has been nonetheless changed, at least in the order. So they call that a neutral mutation, but they wouldn't call it a beneficial. They would say it's a neutral. However, think about this. There's no such thing then as a beneficial mutation because even neutral mutations will eventually have a mutation that does cause the loss of information. So even neutral mutations lead to negative mutations. So even though it may be neutral now, it will eventually go downhill. So there is really no such thing as a beneficial mutation. And so this whole concept is a house of cards. It falls by simply pulling out one card, the whole thing collapses. So no beneficial mutations, they don't accumulate one on top of the other. Darwin struggled with this very idea. Now I'm only paraphrasing what he wrote. This is just a paraphrase. But he struggled with the evolution of the human eye. Now the human eye is an incredibly marvelous thing. I mean, it's a full color motion picture machine. It can change focus, it can change for all kinds of things. The eyeball moves like this so fast you don't even know it, so that the image is constantly being refreshed. It has f-stop. I mean, you just go on and on. It's a marvelous mechanism. And he struggled with this, and he said, what benefit would there be to a creature who had, and I'm just, again, paraphrasing, he said it would take 1 million additive beneficial mutations to get a functioning human eye from a cell that was sensitive to light. He said, what benefit would there be to a creature that had 531,728 beneficial additive mutations, but still only had a half-functioning eye that was useless? And what benefit would there be to the creature to keep it and add to that, pass it on into the next generation, until finally we came up with a working human eye? But his conclusion was interesting. He said, but it must have happened because we have eyes. Wow. Now that's a ludicrous faith. That's why I said evolution is a religion. Now the fact of the matter is, these processes like this supposedly 100 million, whatever, beneficial mutations adding up to a human eye. Think about how counterintuitive that is to evolution. Because what benefit would there be to a creature that had a half-working eye when it was just a drag on the system? It was just using up resources, but it wasn't providing anything useful. Well, according to evolution, that can't happen. Because according to evolutionary philosophy, you only evolve those things that you need. And you've heard this ludicrous statement, oh, I heard this on TV just a couple of days ago, you only use 10% of your brain. Now, there's two things absolutely and utterly wrong with that. First of all, how would you know? Think with me, scientifically, how would you know? Unless you have a perfect human brain to compare it to, how do you know how much of it you're using? Now, I'll admit we don't use 100% because we have a fallen nature. So we have decayed from a perfect brain. But you don't know, you may use 85% of it for all we know. Which you'll never know unless you have a perfect brain to compare it to. And the second thing is, why would you evolve a brain that could do 85% more than you were capable of doing? That's counterintuitive to the evolutionary process, because that would be a drag on the system to evolve a brain bigger than you needed. And so the whole thing is, again, it's a fairy tale for adults. It's a religion believed in by faith. And, of course, you have high priests like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking there.
Well, look, Dr. McMurtry, really enjoyed our time together, and we want to thank you again for coming to Northern Ireland and visiting with us and sharing from your in-depth knowledge on these subjects. As per usual, we're running out of time.
I know, but it's been a pleasure.
Something which the evolutionists seem to have plenty of, by the way, but we're running out of time, and there's so many questions we would have liked to ask you. I would just like to say to our viewers, if you go to Dr. McMurtry's website, creationworldview.org, you'll get all this information and so much more, and you will be truly blessed with the information that you will receive there. We're desperate to get the truth out, Dr. McMurtry.
Amen.
And thank you very much indeed again. It's been a great pleasure.
My pleasure.